When Europeans first saw the city of Benin, they said, "This couldn't have been built by Africans." They were wrong. They stood in silence, their jaws slack, staring at streets so perfectly laid out they rivaled anything in Europe. At the heart of it stood bronze walls glinting under the sun, sculptures so lifelike they seemed to breathe, and a palace that stretched further than the eye could see. This was not the Africa they had been told about. This was the kingdom of Benin, one of the most sophisticated civilizations the world had ever seen. But the story of Benin is not just one of brilliance. It's a story of creation and destruction, of art and erasure, and of how the flames of one empire were nearly extinguished, only to rise again from the ashes. Long before London's streets were paved, before Paris became the city of light, there was Benin, a city planned with precision, its streets mapped in straight lines leading to grand plazas and ceremonial courts. Visitors described it as an Edo paradise. The city was encircled by massive earthen walls stretching over 16,000 kilometers, a feat so monumental that modern archaeologists call it one of the largest earthworks ever constructed by human hands. And at its center stood the Oba's palace, the heartbeat of the kingdom. It was here that art and power merged into something divine. The people of Benin didn't just record their history in words, they forged it in bronze. Each plaque, each statue, each head cast in glowing metal wasn't merely decoration, it was an archive, a visual memory of kings, battles, rituals, and triumphs. Every line etched into the bronze told a story of who they were, what they valued, and how they saw the world. The craftsmen of Benin, the Igun Eronwon, or Royal Guild of Bronze Casters, were not mere artisans. They were historians, priests, and engineers. Their art was born from sacred duty. They believed bronze could carry spiritual energy, that metal could speak across generations. But here's the twist. These bronzes were not primitive. They were technologically superior. Europeans who first encountered them in the late 1400s were stunned. How could African craftsmen master the lost wax casting technique with such precision centuries before industrial furnaces existed in Europe? Some whispered that the bronzes were imported from elsewhere. Others insisted there must have been European teachers. But the truth was simple. The technology was indigenous. Benin had been casting bronze long before Europeans even knew the kingdom existed. Every bronze head of an Oba wasn't just a likeness. It was a vessel of the king's spirit, a connection between the living and the ancestors. The bronzes lined the palace walls, forming a gallery of memory. Together, they told the rise of an empire that began around the 11th century, when the Edo people unified under a divine monarch, the Oba. Under Oba Ewara the Great in the 15th century, Benin reached the height of its glory. The city expanded, diplomacy flourished, and trade connected Benin to the world. Gold, ivory, and pepper flowed outward. Coral, silk, and copper flowed in. But most importantly, ideas flowed. Benin was not an isolated kingdom in the jungle. It was a global player. When the Portuguese arrived in 1485, they were astonished. They found a disciplined society with laws, hierarchy, and wealth beyond imagination. Benin had ambassadors, taxation systems, and military divisions. It was Africa's city of bronze, but also a city of order, ceremony, and spirit. And yet, the encounter with Europe was a double-edged sword. For centuries, trade continued peacefully. But when colonial appetites grew, admiration turned into envy, and envy into conquest. In 1897, the British launched what they called a punitive expedition. The pretext? A few British officers had been killed after entering Benin without permission during a sacred ceremony. But the truth runs deeper. It was an excuse to plunder. They came with guns, cannons, and fire. The city of Benin, once a marvel of civilization, was turned into ashes within days. Palaces burned, the Oba was exiled, priests executed, and the bronzes, thousands of them, were stolen. Imagine that! Generations of history melted down, boxed up, and shipped off to London, Berlin, Paris, and New York. The walls of the Oba's palace became the shelves of European museums. Art that once spoke to ancestors now sits behind glass, stripped of meaning, labeled simply bronze head from Nigeria. They called it preservation, but it was theft, cultural theft on a global scale. Yet even in destruction, Benin's legacy refused to die. Those who survived rebuilt, whispering the stories of their ancestors through oral tradition. And today, the descendants of the Edo people are fighting back, not with weapons, but with truth. Across the world, a new movement is rising, the call for restitution. Museums once proud to display their African treasures are now being forced to face the past. Germany, France, and even the British Museum are being pressured to return the bronzes to where they belong. But here's where it gets deeper. The battle isn't just about the return of metal artifacts. It's about restoring memory. The bronzes were never just art. They were the physical embodiment of a people's history, spirituality, and identity. To return them is to acknowledge that history was stolen and that the narrative must be rewritten. And so, the story of Benin isn't over. The flames that consumed the city in 1897 may have melted its treasures, but they could not melt its soul. Every time a bronze is returned, it's as if a piece of Benin breathes again. In 2022, when Germany announced the return of hundreds of Benin bronzes, it was more than a diplomatic gesture. It was a spiritual moment. The descendants of the Igon Eronmon stood in silence, their eyes glistening as their ancestors' work came home. The circle had begun to close. But perhaps the most powerful truth lies in what the bronzes represent. A challenge to the world's assumptions about Africa. For centuries, colonial powers claimed Africa had no history, no civilization, no art of its own. Yet the bronzes of Benin stand as eternal proof that Africa not only had history, it had mastery. Today, as artists, historians, and filmmakers retell this story, they are doing what the bronzes did centuries ago, turning memory into creation. The fire that once forged those masterpieces now burns in a new generation, reclaiming the narrative of their ancestors. Because the kingdom of Benin was not lost. It was hidden beneath the ashes of empire, waiting for the right moment to rise again. They melted our history into souvenirs, but the fire of Benin still burns. The script touches on the rise of Benin's civilization, its technological mastery in bronze casting, spiritual and historical meanings of the bronzes, the encounter with Europeans, the 1897 British invasion, the theft of the bronzes, and the modern restitution movement that symbolizes the resilience of African identity. It explores themes of memory, art as resistance, and historical justice, ending on a powerful, emotional, and symbolic note that echoes through time.